Today, we are diving deep into one of the most genuinely unsettling short stories you'll ever read, Edgar Allan Poe's The Black Cat. We're not just going to talk about the spooky stuff on the surface. Nope. We're going way deeper into the psychological terror that has made this story stick with readers for almost 200 years. Let's get into it. I mean, it's a perfectly good question, isn't it? How can a story about a guy and his pet be so absolutely horrifying? Well, that's Poe's genius. He takes this simple, everyday setup and uses it to peel back the layers of the human mind and show us the darkness inside. See, the real horror, it's not the cat. It's what the cat brings out in the man. And that quote just nails it. This isn't some campfire ghost story. It is a full-on psychological breakdown, documented on the page. We're about to watch a man's mind completely fall apart. And it all starts with a cat. Okay, so where does this nightmare even begin? Let's quickly lay out the basic story. So, our narrator, he tells us he started out as a really kind, gentle guy. Loved animals. But then, something snaps. He blames it on alcohol, and he just plummets into this spiral of pure rage and violence. First, it's directed at his cat Pluto, and then eventually his own wife. It's this complete, shocking transformation from good to evil that just grabs you right from the start. All right, now let's zoom in a bit, because the real engine of the story is what's happening inside the narrator's head. And this is where Poe is just on another level. We have to talk about one of Poe's signature moves, the unreliable narrator. Think about it. This guy is telling us his story from death row, literally the day before he's scheduled to be executed. He's trying to explain himself, or maybe justify himself. So the whole time we're reading, we have to ask, can we actually believe a single word he says? Or is everything he's telling us just twisted by his own insanity and crushing guilt? And this wasn't a one-off thing for Poe. He was obsessed with this theme. Look at the black cat next to the telltale heart. In both stories, the killer gets away with it. At first. But they aren't caught by some brilliant detective. No, they're undone by their own minds. Their guilt becomes a sound, one real, one imagined, that gives them away. For Poe, the most haunted house of all was the human mind. Okay, so we've been zoomed in on one man's psyche. Now let's zoom all the way out and look at the world he was living in, because a story like this doesn't just come from nowhere. So let's get our bearings. This story was published in 1843, smack in the middle of the Victorian era. And this was a time of incredibly strict social rules, of keeping up appearances, and a whole lot of anxiety about what was considered moral. It's the absolute perfect setting for a story about the terrible things that can hide behind a polite, respectable face. That's the key right there. The narrator's private little hell wasn't so private, really. It was a reflection of a society that was deeply conflicted. In a way, he's the monster that Victorian repression created. He's what happens when you pretend everything is fine on the outside while you're harboring monsters on the inside. And here are the specific fears Poe was tapping into. This era puts so much pressure on people to be perfect, and Poe just rips that polite facade away. He shows you the domestic violence happening behind closed doors, the horrifying power of addiction, and the psychological price people paid for bottling everything up. He's showing us what happens when the mask finally slips. So we have the psychology, we have the history. Now let's get into one of the coolest parts, the powerful symbols that Poe packs into the story. First, of course, the cat itself. Now, Poe knew exactly what he was doing. He's playing on centuries of folklore that link black cats to witches and bad luck. But here's the brilliant part. The cat isn't just some external, spooky omen. It becomes the living, walking symbol of the narrator's own twisted soul and his guilt that he just can't escape. Next up, alcohol. The narrator blames everything on his drinking. And this was no accident. Poe was plugging directly into the huge, heated debates about temperance and alcoholism that were raging in the 19th century. In the story, he calls it the fiend in temperance, and for the narrator, it's a personal demon. But for society at the time, it was a major social demon too. And finally, we have maybe the most bone-chilling symbol in the whole story. After the first cat is gone, a second one appears. And this one has a white patch of fur on its chest that over time, our narrator becomes convinced is taking the exact shape of a gallows. Yeah, this is not subtle. It's a brand. It's a mark of his inescapable fate,
constantly reminding him and us of how this story is going to end. It's judgment, personified in a cat.
So, why are we still talking about this story? What makes it so powerful even today? Well, let's trace its massive influence and see just how long Poe's shadow really is. You can literally draw a straight line from what Poe was doing here to some of the greatest stories ever told. His obsession with the monster within was a clear influence on classics about duality and secret sin, like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And that basic blueprint, the idea that the real horror is psychological torment, that's a cornerstone of the horror genre as we know it today, in everything from books to movies. So, in the end, The Black Cat lasts because it's so much more than a spooky story about an animal. It's a timeless, terrifying look at guilt, addiction, and the violence that people try to hide. It held up a mirror to its own time, and in doing that, it basically helped write the rules for the kind of psychological horror that still terrifies us today. And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If Poe's stories were a mirror for the anxieties of a century, then what do our modern horror stories, the monsters on our screens and in our books right now, say about us? What are our deepest, darkest fears?